Dobar dan i od mene. Ovo je treći panel na kom ćemo govoriti o problemima u primjeni zakona o finansiranju politike.
This is the third panel where we'll speak about the challenges in the implementation of the law. The guests are Nikola Kovačević on behalf of the Senate of the State Audit Institution, Zoran Gavrilović, Executive Director of the Bureau for Social Research, Milica from the Center for Democratic Transition, Marko Sošić on behalf of the Institute Alternative, and Dejan Milovac on behalf of MAS. The agreement is to start with you, Mr. Kovačević. Could you tell us at the beginning what is the role of the State Audit Institution when speaking about the implementation of the law on financing political entities and election campaigns? Good afternoon, everyone. For those present here, I want to say that the State Audit Institution is a relatively young institution established in 2004, and its role is to monitor, to do the oversight of the expenditures of public funds and report the public about that expenditure of all the funds that belong to all of us. As for the audit of political entities and electoral campaigns, started in 2012 on the initiative of Greco and a part of the NGOs in Montenegro. We started with the audit of financial reports and expenditures for election campaigns. In 2016, the legislator decided to distinguish between control and oversight. So in 2016, we established the Anti-Corruption Agency, and they deal with the oversight of election campaigns, and the State Audit Institution does the audit of consolidated financial reports of political entities. What does it mean, consolidated? It means that the funds for their regular operation and the funds for election campaigns. So far, me as the head of the college whose competence is the audit of the consolidated financial reports of political entities, since 2013, since I came to the State Audit Institution, I have signed several hundred audit reports. Before that, we had a lot more while we were doing the audit of election campaigns, but with the amendments to the law from 2019, which entered into force in January 2020, we do the audit of consolidated financial reports of political entities based on the risks of audit and the methodological instructions of financial audit. But we are obliged to do audit of all political entities that have the parliamentary status within 4 years. So all those who are represented in the state and local parliament, and we have around 40 of them. What do your recommendations mostly refer to? I must say that political entities have largely improved their reporting compared to 2012, 13, 14, when we started audits. But in fighting for votes in the election years, political entities do not choose a means of gaining more votes, and most irregularities refer to the situations in which they spent a lot more funds than they collected for the election campaigns. They cover the cost of election campaigns from their regular accounts, which is forbidden. They have to have a separate account for election campaigns, and from that account, they make all the payments. We had a political entity in the elections in 2020. They collected about 500,000 euro for the election campaign, and they spent $1.5 million. The State Audit Institution claims that you can spend only as much as you collected in the election campaign. And that was confirmed by the experts from the Council of Europe 4 or 5 years ago, because there were some disagreements between the state audit institution, the anti-corruption agency, and the expert confirmed that a political entity can just get the amounts that they collected for the elections. And that is not the case. Unfortunately, it's not. Very often it happens that some political entities, for 3 years in a row, get a negative opinion from the state audit institution, and everything ends with that. The campaign starts in the media for 4 days. Sporadically, they advertise. In the media, there are statements of NGOs about the political entities' activities. But what happens? The state does not react. And I expected that the voters would punish them for not spending their funds in a transparent manner and for violating the law. And we thought the voters would punish them, but it doesn't happen. When you say the state doesn't react, what do you mean? I think that the police and the prosecutor's office should do better. We submit our reports, especially with negative opinions, to the prosecutor's office, and who should help us in controlling political entities, and they reject to do so, is the parliament or the parliamentary committee. We expected, and we asked the parliamentary committee to introduce the controlled hearing for those political entities that got the negative opinion, at least, but that is constantly avoided. It's been 9 years or 10 years since we've done audit of financial reports of political entities, and there has been no control hearing. How many criminal charges do you submit? Complaints? No, we don't submit them. In accordance with the international standards, the job of the state audit institution is not to submit criminal complaints. We tried to explain that for years to the professional lay public. Eventually, the Directorate for the Budget of the European Commission and the Council of Europe said and gave their opinion that the job of the state audit institution is not submitting complaints. And then we signed a memorandum on cooperation between the state audit institution and the state prosecutor's office. According to that, we informed the state prosecutor's office, saying that we did the audit of a political entity, and our opinion is that there are violations, the following violations of the law. In our opinion, the person responsible for a violation is XY, and then the prosecutor's office should review that. It doesn't mean that if the state audit institution expressed a negative opinion, that there are elements of a criminal offense. It could be due to lack of knowledge or some other things, but it's the job of the specialized law enforcement agencies to look into that and decide. Perhaps there is enough room to hear from you the comment of the role of the state audit institution today. Milica, Kovačević.
Hvala. Naravno, bitno je da, drago mi je da je državna revizorska institucija.
I'm glad that state audit institution has played its role, but it is only a part of what it takes, because audit comes after things are over. After the elections are over, and so they don't stop the things from happening, and do not preempt and prevent problems in relation to that. And that is why their reports are very important. They are after political party financing report. The second most important ones I think that's what makes them important. However, the situation we are in right now, it would be much more to see important to see proactive role of some other institutions who do not have to wait for the final balances to be presented before they do something, so that the anti-corruption agency, instead of administrative approach, could foster more practical and preventive approach. I have in mind all these bodies that need to and have to investigate the cases. We haven't seen any political party being investigated so far. And as for the communication of and how they do it in the state audit institution, they do things better than they did before. What is important is that is important that when something that you have to do something while you still have in the heat of the day. You might remember, some of you, because you were involved, when we got the first negative report about the work of political party. It was scandalous. At least around those days, that was news in very many media. There were condemnations from all over. What did we do 3 years after that to do something? So today it wouldn't even make the news. So I often read the comments to that, and you know what citizens say? They say all parties are doing that, so I find it fine. So the fact that our state bodies are inactive led us to a situation or to think that these conclusions are not relevant at all and that we shouldn't be bothered about that. Dejan and Marko are here and they will talk about anti-corruption aspect of public finance. I want to say that this question is a very basic question, as it is about level playing field. No matter how good your idea is, you can't do much unless you have money for that. So this is the issue that we should discuss or reply to say whether there is that are all the runners in the process given the same conditions to do so. We can't tell and we can't claim based on the available information. We can't say who is funding them and how they do it. Do you trust those reports? No. There are lots of research that showed that they were incorrect, untrue. They most often claim they are getting funding only from the budget and from donations. And we are one of very few countries in the world where businesses are not interested in having an impact on or influence over political parties. But then below the scratch, you find somewhat different thing. We see the phenomenon where you spend more than you earn. And we have shown that different segments of political campaigning, they spend much more money than they are given. The same as 2016, 2019, 30, sorry, 20. And so this is important to know that after so many years, we have the surveys which says that regular businesses are funding it, but doing that irregular in an irregular and disguised way. And the other thing that is particularly important and that is very much relevant is that we have a problem where political parties are funded by criminal circles, and they use illicit money. And the other story is the misuse of public resources in favor of and for the purpose of political or electoral campaigns. So we see our money being abused in order to get advantage or edge in the elections. So we see it on the rise, particularly last 2 years, because all participants in the political life, in political sphere, who exercise some power have engaged in this process. We used to have the analyses. We used to have the statistics of those visits last couple of years. And these reports were very interesting for everyone. But now, given the situation where everyone abuses and misuses the state property, the funds, and everything for their private ends, this is. You look at the report where there are no costs attached to public rallies, and thinking just along the practical lines that it is impossible, and that someone else actually covered for that and they didn't report it. And there is a situation where the fairness of elections are brought to question, because not all participants in the process start from the same plane. We should have Zoran Gavrilović with us. He's program director, executive director, Bureau for Social Research.
So we plan to have you as the second speaker, but I looked at Milica first and then gave her the floor. Sorry for that. So we're talking about the problem in the implementation of the law. How do you see that situation, and where do you see room for improvement of those solutions? At the beginning, I wish to thank Mans for initiating this important topic and invited us to help as much as we can. The dimension that you discuss has a double two aspects: functioning of the campaign and presence in the media. Well, if you take into account Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina as neighboring states who have their own interest in Montenegro, and if they have the possibility through TVs, cable TVs or national frequency TVs registered in these states, they can also have an influence on the election process in your country. And that's why the initiative that the MANS launched through this project is important. It has opened the room to which extent the media from the neighboring states can contribute to the spilling over of election campaigns. We carried out monitoring during the last local elections in Montenegro on the 23rd of October. What our monitoring showed is that we didn't have a lot of that, but a later legal analysis showed that there are resources and mechanisms that are sometimes not used, and on the other hand, there are solutions that need to be improved. Actually, when we speak about cross-border spilling over of activities, I mean you have the media registered in the neighboring states that allow actors from Montenegro who participate in the programs of these media to present their activities either as members of their party lists or candidates or public officials, and that company influences the outcome of the election process. On the other hand, it can frequently done in such a manner that violates the Montenegrin legislation. And that is why it's very important to know that there are two mechanisms that in Serbia or Montenegro are poorly used, not adequately used. There is no will to apply them. On the one hand, it's the Convention on ratifying the European Convention on Cross-Border Television that regulates whether how a TV registered, let's say, in Serbia can violate rules in Montenegro through its programs. On the other hand, there is a directive of the European Commission on Audiovisual Media Contents, which is applied only to the EU member states. The first convention, these are practically the laws in all states and refer to the member states of the Council of Europe since 2009. So what is the point? The point is that you have a mechanism or a tool that if a TV from a neighboring state, in this case Serbia, broadcasts some contents in the election campaigns and violates in such a way the media legislation in Montenegro, directly or indirectly, be it election law or the law on electronic media, you can actually sanction the television who does that in Montenegro. But there isn't such a practice. The big problem is in convention itself. When it was drafted, it didn't recognize the election spilling over. In Article 7, it listed that it is necessary through the convention or through the reporting or monitoring. The objectivity of the reporting is monitored. So it's up to us as organizations in civil society to create a proposal and improve our domestic legislation. So this election dimension that is not recognized in the convention, at least it's not visible, to make it more visible through our legislation. There is a need for that. Our monitoring in Serbia shows that there are topics or actors that are from Bosnia and Herzegovina or from Montenegro who are exposed to that. It is one of the factors. It seems that the last elections in Montenegro, local elections, and the elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when it comes to the media, in Serbia, were not very visible. I can provide some political factors why it was the case, but there is an interesting finding from our monitoring. When the local elections in Montenegro were ended, the presence of the actors from Montenegro increased in the Serbian media. For example, the political party Europe Now was praised in the newspapers in Serbia. It was not a part of our analysis, but this is just an example. They were presented in the daily Novosti, which is anti-European oriented. So, for the beginning, I want to say that there is a problem, there is a challenge. We have instruments. The instruments are not well developed because I did the analysis with my colleagues. Article 6 on the law on electronic media in Montenegro should be amended. The colleagues from Montenegro can give their opinion about that. That article regulates the process of reporting. You have the convention on cross-border TV, which refers to the member states of the Council of Europe. On the other hand, there's the EU directive on audiovisual media content. It refers only to the EU member states. The law in Montenegro insists on the EU directive on the audiovisual media contents. But since Montenegro is still not a member, although I want it to become, I think that law is not fully applicable. If Montenegro wants to efficiently protect its media space against unlawful and unethical influences, I think that this article of the law should be amended in terms of using the provisions of the conventions on the cross-border television, that's the European Convention of the Council of Europe. That's one of our findings. I think the regulatory bodies should cooperate more. You have an analysis done by the International Republican Institute did in case of Orban, who uses his national minorities to spread his influence in the neighboring states. Mans opened a lot of issues with this conference, and the topic of the conference, compared to my colleague who dealt with this topic. I've dealt with this less. To me, the project that we are doing with Mans has opened a new dimension for me, because we are all closed in their own trenches and we need cooperation. And I hope that the regulatory bodies, no matter what they are like, will understand that. And without interstate, interregulatory cooperation in the area of the member states that are not, of the countries that are not EU member states, and the territory of former Yugoslavia, we cannot improve the integrity of the election process. Thank you for this introductory presentation. If you could simplify things, Mr. Gavrilović spoke about some sort of parallel election campaigns in neighboring states. We have all witnessed that. We could see the candidates for the councillors in Serbian television several times a week. What else is there that the Institute Alternativa identifies as election campaigns?
Hi, salute from my side. Let us go back to what we spoke about earlier about the role of the state audit institution. Maybe it's not so popular thinking. I think that they don't have a place or a position in this process at all. We know that there is a law that prescribes that state audit institution should do and waste time, so to say. I hope you won't be offended with this. So you have the fact that about 8 million euros that is given from the state budget, and the state audit institution has to do the audit of all political subjects locally and nationally at least once in 4 years. And they have to look at 60 state enterprises. Out of 60, they did only 6 or 7, and only RTCG state television service, radio and television service is enormously big spender, and so 1/5 of state audit institution staff who should be doing something that won't be indicative of anything. So in those financial reports, you see what they do and how they spend the money. and the best reports are made by the ruling party, and they have always had it. Why? Because they have the biggest capacity, they're best organized, and of course, they won't be presenting what they are doing in gray zone. And what they report is neatly report everything that they take or get from the state budget. And we know that the abuse happens somewhere else, and it's not a part of their reports, and state audit institutions can't do anything about that. So all parties that belong to Democratic Front got all positive reports in the year of campaign, when we saw that they spent much more, loads more than what they spent in reality. So their role is irrelevant there, and we spend enormous amount of resources there. They, as the state audit institution, can't help here, whereas they have to waste time and resources for that, and so they spend 16 million euros on that in 4 years. The contracts, employment, state-owned enterprises, social benefits, all of this was poorly regulated in this law. So the period from calling of elections until they're delivered is not something that starts with a campaign. Milutin Đukanović, the director of his EPCG, will start abusing and misusing funds from his state-owned enterprise, the state-owned enterprise that he is the director of. Won't start the campaign the moment the elections are called. So imagine what happens with now, what they are doing with the fact that now they're buying one hospital, the state is buying one hospital out of bankruptcy, and all of that just in the time running up to elections in that town. For us, the campaign is running all the time as of the moment when someone comes to a position of power, becomes the director of the public-owned enterprise. Then lots of illogical stuff. The cars owned by the state should not be used during the campaign. It's totally absurd to control it. And we look into the only the pre-election period, the campaign period. What happens beyond it? What happens in between? If we need to see the transparency, we need to look at transparency throughout the period of 4 years between two elections. So what we have to do is to stop some activities during the period, pre-election period, and if we stop some activities at that time, if we freeze those activities, then what happens? We turn blind eye that that go beyond that period. So we can't look at or analyze the meddling of the interference of the church, for example, in election campaigning only during that period. That is why I believe that instead of looking into a small chunk of funds, we should look at that in their integrity. we should look into all contracts they make, that we should in detail control state contracts, all the spending of local self-governments, ministries, and the other users of budget, every user or all funds that could be used before the elections. So how do we implement this law? Even if it's implemented duly, then it doesn't give us a hint at what they do otherwise or beyond that period, and they are not naive. So we can't freeze only the spending and party employments in the pre-election period. We need to look into its entirety. For example, Democrats said that they didn't allow the use of budgetary subsidies for this year, and this is totally irrelevant because you stopped it for only a period of time. The idea is that we have, for example, cabinets of Prime Minister and all commissions deciding who to give the grants or money to. The idea then speaks volumes of the fact that we should not look into spendings in this very short period. I don't know if I was clear enough about this. So let's hear from Dejan. What else?
Let us hear Dejan and Mans, what the analysis of Mans has shown. Good afternoon. Perhaps I would just take on what my colleague has just said about the role of state audit institution and what evidence we need. We cannot wait for the perfect evidence that was proven by the affair envelope, and we had the recognition that Duško Knežević was not the only one that financed DPS. I do agree that the reports of state audit institutions do not have a big influence after things happen. I'm afraid that the same goes for the reports of the anti-corruption agency. So as organizer, I must say that we did invite anti-corruption agency to participate in this event, but they never show up. When we speak about local elections or the parliamentary elections in 2020, we as the NGO had the partners in political parties to terminate these practices, because the current ruling parties were very supportive until the elections, local elections in Podgorica. We have analyzed them when it comes to the financing of political campaigns and so on. But they have assumed the old mechanisms. There was no political will to amend the law. We could see in the panel that no matter how much they declaratively claim that they support some activities, they can hardly change anything before the next extraordinary elections or presidential elections. They cannot even elect the members of the Constitutional Court. On the other hand, the institutions that are directly in charge of control act worse than ever before. The political majority in the parliament did not want to do some serious cuts to amend the law on the prevention of corruption, to define the law on the work of the anti-corruption agency. For the third time, they have got a negative opinion of the state audit institution. Our experience this year is that we have not only a passive relation of the anti-corruption agency, they actually proactively obstruct the implementation of the law, not just them, but all those who want to point to some problematic issues, such as the NGOs. I will tell you about my finding. Anti-corruption agency decided for the campaign between August and October that August should not be the August that should be monitored in terms of donations. So we practically had a situation when state institutions had to observe the limits regarding spending as of September. And in the previous period, they did something which was not under control. Institutions, even before the elections, had the instruction that they would not have to observe the limitations in August. I think Marko Milica mentioned the budget reserves. We could hear today that the use of the budget was prevented by the review of the budget, but at the beginning of September, we had more than 300,000 euro of payments from the budget as social benefits. So that was during the election campaign. But we have some evidence that it has been done since the beginning of this year. We also bear in mind employment in state companies and the law on the prevention of corruption does not provide the obligation for these institutions to inform the anti-corruption agency on these additional employments. We also monitor the employment in public companies since the beginning of this year. It was because the elections were planned for May, and then they postponed them for October. So we monitored employment in the biggest public companies at the level of the state and local governments. Since the beginning of the year, more than 1,700 people have been employed in state companies, which includes electric power plant, coal mine, plantage, and the airports of Montenegro. And they fully hid their data. They justified that by saying that they were protecting the personal data. And some of them said they self-regulated those issues. And these are the systems that can absorb a lot of new people through employment. The leaders of the electric power plant and the coal mine speak about that openly. They say they promise in new employment on the local level. In these state companies. So there isn't a big difference between what DPS did and what the current government does. The prevailing feeling is that what DPS did for 30 years, they gradually renewed their electorate but maintained their voters in these companies, while the new authorities actually created a new voting body in this company in the meantime, and that's why working on that day postponed the elections from May to October. Through the surveys we do, we want to provide the data that you cannot proactively find on the site of the State Audit Institution on the Corruption Agency. We have a database that has detailed information. The regular financing of political parties are literally every cent in 2019, 2021 was published for all political parliamentary parties, and you can compare their finances in the election year and in terms of regular financing and the election year. I will provide some data. There is obvious leaps when it comes to the costs that can be often seen in the financing of political campaigns. For example, DPS from regular financing in the election year had 2 times more costs for telephones and communication, 6 times more for office materials, and 6% more for public surveys. And these are the information that are contained in the reports on regular activities, not on election campaigns. Democrats had 50% more contracts, 50% more for fuel, and 50% more for renting premises. So we analyze all groups of costs in their reports. For example, SMP, 12 times more for office materials, 4 times more for rent, 2 times more for food and beverages, 60% for part-time employment. URA, the same, 2 times more to physical persons, 6 times more for rent, for social networks, 2 times more for renting and office materials, and 2 times more for food and beverages. This just shows that political parties fund some of their electoral activities to regular financing. And in such a way, they have certain advantage over other parties. So the limit that is defined by the law does not mean, when you calculate these costs into the regular financial reports, the small percentage that they control refers to the benefit, the FMPPs that are not significant. The agency controlled only 1% of all these costs, according to our data. So obviously there is a need to amend the law, but also to bring the institution to the level where we don't have accomplices to political parties that violate the law, that they will have analysis and also sanctions for the political parties who violate the legislation. How do you comment the existing laws and regulations? Where is there the room for improvement? Is the problem with the laws or their implementation? It is true that this law should be amended, but let's not attach too much attention to that. What is much more important is implementation. We still have prohibitions and limitations in the law on financing of political parties and election campaigns. It is, for example, prohibited to have finances from foreign states or campaigns conducted from foreign states, or to get money from criminal activities. It is prohibited that those who have contracts with the law, with the state, contracts on public procurement or some public works, that those who haven't paid salaries for 3 months cannot fund political activities. That is not observed. We think that we can resolve the problem with the change of the law, amendments to the law. Let's, of course, amend the law, change the law, but let's do everything to implement the existing laws. Last year, we introduced the Institute of Financing of Women Organizations in order to encourage more women to participate in the political life. What have we got? The first year, no party provided a special report for funding women organizations. They said that the Ministry of Finance did not provide a template, but that's not a justification. We recommended the Ministry of Finance to do the template this year. Now we controlled the spending of funds of women organizations. No party observes the law in that respect. Marko put it right. I understand it. Compared to other budget users, the funds for political parties from public sources are minor. And that's true. Pension fund, employment agency, these big systems. But we, as a small state, have the biggest allocations for political entities in the region. 0.5% for regular work, then funding political party clubs in the parliament, funding salaries in party clubs, then councillors' clubs, where we provide their offices for them, then 0.25% for election campaigns, 0.7%, 0.05% for women organizations, that's the state level, 0.07% for the president of the state. These are huge funds. Only us and Croatians, and up to an extent Serbia, do the audits of consolidated financial reports of political entities. It is usually done by other bodies. In the UK, Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is done by the State Election Commission. They control the spending of funds because they have the information directly. I don't want to find excuse for anyone, but politicians, as a rule, have as their first goal the fight for votes. Even in democratic countries where you have the most responsible people, the Chancellor, Helmut Kohl from Germany, was accused of abusing funds for their party purposes, or Sarkozy in France was sentenced for abusing the funds from donations. But they are democratic countries and they have the power to deal with these phenomena and these individuals. I'm afraid we don't have such strength to deal with that. Thank you for this, but I think that our legal framework is not always the best one, but it's much better that existed earlier, that there was no limitation in spending or donations. We have recognized at that time when we adopted the new law what were the problems, and we incorporated these problems in the law, or the provisions to fight these problems. The parties that deal with these dirty affairs show that in every election process we think what is the new thing that they have come up with to violate the law. And after we discovered that one of the best donors of DPS are Roma people from Konik settlement, Podgorica, and then we amended the law in order to overcome that. So I don't reject the amendments to the law as something that is not crucial in order to improve the practice, although I fully agree for this laws and for all other laws that the implementation is crucial. And unfortunately, the institutions in charge of the implementation are not held accountable for not implementing it. Everybody may be tempted to do something contrary to the law, but people still don't do it because it's unlawful. I'll say something briefly on the same topic. I agree with everything that Marko said. I just want to remind you that not everybody is aware that this law, when it was adopted in this form in 2014, it was adopted with the full understanding that part of the system was not functioning well. The role was allocated to the state audit institution, hoping that the agency that was planned at the time, anti-corruption agency, we started functioning in 2016, at one point would develop its capacities and that it would be able to control the funding of political parties, and that the state audit institution wouldn't have to do it. Unfortunately, in 2022, it has still not happened. I must say, not for Marko and myself, but for the wider public, if the annual report of funding of political parties that is prepared by state audit institution, if he abolished that, we would actually deprive all the journalists of complete information. So that was the case for other things. When the law was drafted, we knew that the system of public procurement could not be corrected or improved, not, at least not quickly. In a normal state, the tender is won by those who provide the best bid. It is completely irrelevant whether in their private time they donate some money to a political party, but unfortunately it's not the case in Montenegro. We know in Montenegro that these are privileged persons, and that this law served as a patch for something that could not be resolved at one point. Also some other issues. This anti-corruption agency, they should deal with the prevention of corruption. They're not focused only on financing political parties. For months, people have spoken about mass employment, the biggest companies in Montenegro. We have all similar experience. We cannot get information from a lot of these companies. The anti-corruption agency, what have they done? Are they the only one that they don't know about Formula One employee for voters? Obviously, they're the only ones that haven't heard about this. The problem is systemic. The law introduced a lot of prohibitions that cannot be implemented because there are also some holes in some other areas waiting for something to resolve. Things would be giving up. So we need to preempt before they think of the new ways of abuses. Thanks.
To clarify, I just wanted to provoke discussion. Of course, I'm not in favor of having the state audit institution totally ruled out, but that they do stay on board in the same manner like they do with other budget users. Because the legal spending by political parties at the central level, I'm sure it will be 8 million. We have the budget of 3 billion euros. Ministry of Science, the smallest ministry in the government, has the budget of 8 million euros, and it will hopefully sometime be audited, but you know, even may not be in the 4-year time. And EPCG, 350 million euro budget, and lots of options to abuse funds, to give someone grants, to write off someone's debt, etc., etc. So. And for the public enterprise coal mine in Plevna, they also, that I mentioned before, have never been audited. So, and just imagine a state audit institution would do the audit of Action for Tivat, a tiny party, and when they do the audit, then the state audit institution would waste time to do that. we still don't know the number of the number of people working in the state enterprises. We don't know how big is our state administration, how big are local administrations, and so imagine that. So they don't care about this law, and it won't stop corruption in this sense at all. What I wanted to say, political parties should be audited by state audit institution, but not as they were until now. They, in my opinion, get reports of all sorts, and then we, judging by their reports, could say that DPS is a neat party with neat accounts, and they have a seal of approval. They are doing fine, and that they were not involved in corruption. Whereas we know what happened, we know what was done with misuse of state, the level of state, and how they have abused the recruitment process, the use of official cars, and all kinds of sorts of things that the audit report could show the truth. What I'm for is to have transparency all around the year. That the ministry cannot allow itself to not reply to my request to take a look into their contracts, and this can't happen. This is inadmissible, and instead just stop freezing such activities in run up to elections. Yeah, I think that the presentation is the situation is more dismal now than it used to be. I think that this scandalous exchange of awarding of contracts, abuse of sponsorship, and the pace of abuse has been increased because the previous incumbency did it by a standard rhythm, and the new ones are very intense on that, as they don't know how long they will be around, and they want to make most of the time available. So it's not encouraging, speaking for myself. So given that everything ends like that, prosecutor doesn't react, anti-corruption agency doesn't, and then all these criticisms are just futile. Have you seen the reports? The abuse taking place there. I won't call them abuse. And so you check all the information, financial audits say how everything was conducted, whether the books were kept okay. The worst thing that could happen is cash payments, and you know that's the crucial part of that. But bigger actual costs than reported ones. You can't do it, Marina, and you don't have any legal or other competencies or authority to that. Yes, what should be is that agency should look at all contracts on all employments and recruitments that could be abused in run-up to parliamentary presidential elections. On next Thursday, our Senate is going to adopt a plan for the next year in our acts. We will, yes, it will be confidential information so as not to be leaked to those entities that will be audited so that we could, in a way, take them by surprise and not to tip it off to them. The audited some part of energy sector will be under the audit. I won't say which part, but a part of it will be audited. Let me tell you, last or this year, we found a Ministry of Justice that should set example to those who are observing the law, and you remember that that we got to the Supreme Court the negative report, the prosecutor service negative report, Ministry of Justice yes also got negative report. We indicated that they used contracts, termed contracts inordinately, and these could be abused a lot. And we even gave a report to the prosecutor, and they replied that they could not prosecute this case because there are no elements of criminal offense in that, so it can't be qualified as such. They funded the program in an unlawful way. However, the prosecutor dismissed it and said that there is that he cannot qualify it as a criminal offense. Then there is that if we want to support independent institutions, we should tell them what they are doing badly and not to then make it problematic with the fact that I came from one party or the other. Yeah, you know, there is a guy who was an MP, an active politician, and then became an auditor. I signed reports myself, hundreds of them. And if they want to pass blame on me, it shouldn't be that I was a member of the party, but they should indicate which reports that I did and signed were biased or wrong. So there was an entity that we got and presented lots of negative opinions about, and the head of the former minister of that ministry that we gave a negative audit to, instead of refuting our criticisms and analyses and indicate to where we did wrong, he didn't speak of that, even though he had some arguments, could have some arguments if possible. But he said that I was from BPS and that he was wrong for not having replaced us when he was in power. And now we have Sigma helping us with developing the new strategic plan. And it said that the state audit institution has its reputation here for being objective and unbiased towards everyone and for its transparency. Would you be happier to have a bigger scope of competence? No. Yes, we have the law on state audit institution that is prescribing our competencies, but we also have to be guided by international accounting standards, because other professional accounting international associations would exclude us, write us off. I'm sure, Mr. Kovačević, that you are not dismissed for your party membership, but they do dismiss Mr. Jelić, who we know, for his misdeeds, even though Marko said that nobody cares about the recommendations. I'm sure that lots of parties that are auditors do not trust your reports, because some of the auditors was involved directly into the affair of purchase of votes for the famous rule of one employment for 4 votes. So as for the report of State Audit Institution, it's the fact that what is important is to have as good access to information as possible, that parties and state audit institutions should follow the norms and rules of the free access to information. So we have indicated to some very concrete cases, and this is what led to changes. We indicated to some of the cases which bore the element of highest abuse of powers. I know that, contracts for services are just a small part, and I know that even if they are rectified for the parties on the recruitment, they will find a leeway to do that anyway. So that the reports. The reports are not only those of state audit institution or tax authority report, and so, but definitely we will find a recording, and it's next to impossible from our side to get some information to. And we have the good practice after 20th of August that they would send us the Treasury report where we could get an idea of spending. We had that case, very transparent, Ministry of Finance, and then new minister, the latest minister, cut it off. So that they deny us the access to information now, and they all play together in order to thwart and frustrate all our attempts to track down the dirty money and the proceeds of crime and funding. Where, as Djukanović said, they reported only what they declared, only what they had to declare. And we need to look at the free access to information law. If you actually cut those activities short, one could hardly risk to repeat it again. So we need to narrow down the scope of abuse. What needs to be our common task of all of us. So we need to enable that everyone has access to all information, and that is how we could facilitate the process of getting information and getting information right. And for the end, the question for all of you panelists, Next year we have presidential elections, most probably the extraordinary parliamentary elections. So it'll happen very soon. What will happen about that? What is it that we get if we get into the electoral race with these loopholes? I support the fact that the law needs to be amended. I fear that all the amendments will just remodeling things, meaning that the model of who we support and what projects get support, like women in the parliament or so, and then I see that it remains overlooked that political parties can get private funding, and that the entire amount should be up to 10% of the budget. The current budget 160 was that, and then 1.6 million comes to that part. It could be the funding, private funding total for a party. They also allow the charities and contributions in kind or else, which are most problematic, charities and the other stuff. So we don't make a good evaluation of non-pecuniary contributions, even though the law prescribes otherwise. However, going back to the report on judiciary in 2019, the report was negative, and they have made payments by the rules of article that was declared unconstitutional by Constitutional Court. And after that, we went to prosecutorial service, and they also applied the same norm that was declared by the Constitutional Court to be unconstitutional. And I will finish with this. Yes, we should amend the laws, come up with the best solutions, but the best laws won't be helpful if we don't apply them as we should. As for presidential elections, the presidential elections and are coming and are imminent, and presidential elections are to be called at latest on 20th January and to be held until 16th of April. The parliament will finish its regular work, and we can't have new legislation in place in the election year, and so that election reform that was allegedly top priority has never got that importance. And we had two prime ministers after 2020 victory, and it was so upstaged. We don't know what's the prospect for parliamentary elections. However, I have to say that this situation, it would be good to get into the election cycle with an agreement that would address some major issues in the electoral legislation and electoral rules, and we can't do it in haste. We have to summon our knowledge, all knowledge we could master. Big omissions could be corrected, but what it takes is a long-running work that's dedicated to this important part. As for political Presidential elections, I want to say we have the already registered parties coming up with candidates, and as for those parties, they could be controlled. And according to the role of an application of the law, as said by my previous speakers, they will have the law prescribes the full control even beyond the election process. And as for presidential elections, we would have some new people running, and we would have people running campaigns with dodgy money. This is what happened in 2018. These people became mainstream, and I don't see the minimum that could be handled, and the candidacies are to be confirmed 20 days ahead of the elections. And we agreed that it is not worthwhile to do anything in last couple of months ahead of elections.
Mr. Gavrilović, if you are with us, what's your comment for the end? Were you listening to us? Yes, I've been listening all the time. Basically, when speaking about my topic, it's necessary to see whether the Montenegrin law on electronic media or the institution on the electronic media can make some kind of a request referring to the Convention on Cross-Border TV and establish monitoring with the competent electronic body in Serbia that has been on strike as of yesterday because the opposition parties and the civil society and media exert pressure on them, and they don't have adequate autonomy. Civil society organizations should also help, because unfortunately our institutions do not have adequate integrity to act in accordance with their competences. What I want to open up again, and which is much more related to the integrity of the election process directly, not just the media part. Because if you don't watch the media, monitor the media and the money in the election process, I don't think you can do much regarding integrity. One topic. Political parties are a pillar of corruption. Mr. Kovačević earlier spoke about personal integrity. Yes, in Britain, there is professional integrity. If somebody becomes an MP, he has his professional integrity. When they become president of the state-owned institution, they also have their professional integrity. And this professional integrity is something that preserves the institution and the MP as a public official or a president of a state-owned institution to do in accordance with the rules of the profession. Rules of the profession are the rules of profession. Politics is something different. I think it's very important that in addition to financial audit, we start discussion on the integrity of political parties. In some countries, such as the Netherlands, political parties have their integrity plans. We have tried to do that in Serbia, but that has stopped. The fact is that political parties, if they want to get public money, they need to have a system of integrity, internal integrity plan that has different dimensions on how people become members, how the party is funded, how they're promoted, do they have whistleblowers. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Just as this convention that which was not visible, but is becoming visible now. That's the key. If the parties do not represent the interest of the social groups, and that based on the votes they get, they enter the parliament, and that they continue to be companies for employment or protection against impunity or starting their own businesses, we will have latent functionality of the parties. I agree that sometimes it's better to implement the bad law rather than search for the laws that cannot be implemented. But if you don't resolve the functionality of the parties, what is their purpose? What's their goal? We have done surveys here. Something similar was done in Montenegro, I think. Unless the parties are brought to their functionality, no laws will resolve anything. You will always have the water that goes through the sand. And every solution will be somehow neglected. That's all from me. I wanted to propose a set of laws maybe after these opinions that the laws cannot always resolve abuses, but we have to start from something. We have to patch up things, and when the new holes appear, we'll have to patch them up as well. As for the elections for the next year, nothing can be done. Everything has been done. People have been employed. They sit in public companies or are not even there, but they get their salaries. Sponsorships have been provided, donations have been provided. But for the next elections, I don't think we can wait for the elections without the amended law on the budget and fiscal responsibility, which will prohibit the abuse of current budget reserves. For these purposes, we need to have the law on companies with the majority state ownership. They now work as the private sector. We mustn't wait for the elections without amendments to the labor law, which would in detail define the process of employment and labor relations. 10,000 people who work in public companies, for 20,000 people who work in public administration are employed based on this labor law. And you can easily employ anyone the way you want under non-transparent conditions. So I would prepare the field to resolve the issues of labor, budget spending, the work of state companies be somehow settled, and then see how the parties will find new ways. And then we can do the new legal framework. I can't hear that, sorry. The experience of these 2 years has shown that all scenarios are possible, all combinations, political, legal, are possible. Political parties can easily neglect laws if it's in their interest, but if it's in their interest, they can also change some things. A law that would additionally arrange this area and limit anyone who is in power implies that the process starts as soon as possible, no matter whether the job will be done before the next elections or not. But despite any law, what has to be settled is the anti-corruption agency and their work. Without the changes of the work of that institutions and the people who work in the institution dealing with their integrity, we can come to the situation where we have the best possible legal solution, and the agency that does not observe that law. Thanks for being with us. We'll continue speaking about it.